Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Pragmatic Idealist. I'm your host, Mike Brand. It's been a while since I've made these kind of podcast style of videos, but I'm planning to do more of them. And if you like this content, please hit that like button. If you leave a comment also, let me know what kind of topics you'd like to hear about in the future. On today's episode, I'm joined by my friend Dr. Saghar Shahidi-Birjandian. She's the founder of Collaborative Structural Change, where she draws on over a decade of experience in research, mediation, and documentation to address and prevent mass atrocity violence through grounded, practice-informed approaches. Her areas of focus in research and practice include decoloniality and transitional justice, evidence-based and contextualized problem analysis for policy development, and strengthening the capacity of transitional justice interventions to prevent recurrence of mass atrocities. Her research supports participating communities, government entities, and non-governmental organizations in Canada, across the Iranian diaspora, and in Uganda to apply decolonial and critical approaches to justice during periods of social and political transition. She earned her PhD in Politics and International Studies from SOAS University of London. She holds her MSc in Global Affairs with a concentration in International Law and Human Rights from New York University, and a BA in Philosophy with a focus on ethics from the University of Victoria. I'll leave a link to her LinkedIn in the description if you want to connect with her. Without further ado, here's our conversation. So thanks so much for joining me. We have so many things that we want to talk about, so hopefully we'll be able to get to all of it.
Yeah.
But want to start off with, how are you doing? What are you up to? Tell me a little bit about the organization that you're working on.
Thanks, Mike. It's very nice to sit with you. It's a form of medicine, as I've said before, so thanks for having me. I think about 5 months ago, I came to the realization that it's time to leave the academy and leave the government work and really pour myself into building what is called collaborative structural change. And as you know, we founded the original collaborative social change during COVID period with a lot of like-minded folks. And then it kind of went stagnant when life returned to normal. And now we're at a place where I'm going full force ahead with Collaborative Structural Change, which is a nonprofit organization headquartered in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, but has a network of consultants across more than 7 countries and founding members that span across about 5 countries. And our mandate is to address and prevent mass atrocities, but specifically through structural change. And we understand structure as having 2 component parts. One, structures order our everyday life, and 2, they provide predictability in our everyday lives. And so it could include anything from government laws and policies to how families socialize their children, to how we communicate, to our relationships to technology, our shopping habits, what have you. And what we believe, or our theory of change, is that if we are able to understand how structure functions in each context, and change the ones that put people at risk, then we're in a place where we're not creating the conditions for mass atrocities to be possible. And so that's really the impetus for the focus on structure. But also in terms of, why have the organizational model, which is not hierarchical and is based in a network of consultants, all of which are at different stages of their careers, at different backgrounds, skill sets, etc. Why not have that hierarchy, and why bring so many diverse people together? The anti-hierarchy model is because we want to be problem-driven. We don't think that the organizational model that dominates our field is conducive for fast response and effective response to the diverse ways atrocities are perpetrated. As you know, there's usually a hierarchy and running programs like a human rights program, etc. So we're moving toward really responding to our realities and our local realities, especially, and responding to structures that we see make atrocities possible and normalized, but doing it in a way where we're bringing these issues to each other and we're responding without kind of pre-existing programs. This lack of hierarchy and pre-existing programs also helps us move away from kind of the donor-dependent model. Usually, as you know, our fields are like a really bad grade 2 soccer tournament where if donors say they're interested in gender justice, now we're all specialists in that, and we all just kind of
always chasing
the ball. Yeah, we just chase we're all that, right? So moving away from that to really responding to the realities and getting away from the donor dependency, because as we've seen, right, very recently with the Trump administration just kiboshed most of the international aid, particularly USAID funding. how many people are out of work, how many great programs are no longer in existence, and also just like because that dependency existed, we need an exit strategy that doesn't just leave everybody hanging, right? Because the dependency is real. So in addition to large numbers of our colleagues being unemployed, it's also all the people they were serving, right? What happens to them and just not caring at all. And that's really how donors typically operate, right? They're politically driven.
And I think just to say, as a lot of people hear, shutting down of USAID and think about all the people that are losing their jobs and think they are just folks that are being paid a big dollar salary in Washington, D.C. or in other capitals around the world. But a lot of that money also trickled down to funding staff at the local level. And so it isn't just, big INGOs getting big, grants. It's also funding local partners, local organizations, locally driven efforts, civil society organizations and NGOs that, not only are the people that are beneficiaries of some programs losing out, as you just said, but it's also those people that were working in these spaces in those countries that were reliant on some of that funding. And there's been several, reports of local organizations having to just completely close because so much of the funding was wrapped up in not necessarily directly USAID funding, but trickle down funding. USAID funds a program that the UN funds, or USAID funds a program that, a big INGO funds, and then they give that money, to a local organization. We could talk about how that's maybe not the best model to begin with, but the fact that the very rapid decision by the Trump administration to completely close USAID without a drawdown strategy, without any plan, that impact is very real. I mean, there's at least one or two estimates that say over the next few years, like 14 million people will lose their lives because of the lack of aid. Wow. And I don't think we have an estimate for how many people will likely be displaced, because if people can't get the aid that they need in certain areas, they're going to move. They're going to be forced to move. And so then when they're moving to another place that also would require more, humanitarian support, what happens then? Right.
And I mean, and clearly that's not a concern, right? It's not a concern for those calling the shots on that. And that's what I think we all need to consider that moving forward. Like before, the donor dependency was really about kind of rigid frameworks and imposing agendas and goals and norms on context and maybe actors that don't necessarily want to prioritize those issues. And now it's at a place where it's, okay, well, this funding can actually be just yanked from underneath all of us. Simultaneously and completely, have the infrastructure fall apart overnight. So I think the urgency to move away from donor dependency has scaled up significantly. And I think you're right as well that there is this kind of misconception as to like the cushy job, folks based in DC are the ones impacted, whereas that's not the case. And you brought up an important point that I think is really the crux of the issue, is that the model itself is not the best anyway, right? So where do we go from here? And I do think highly localized and inclusive models are the way to go, and moving away from also the exclusive professionalization of this stuff, where certain fields, certain skills, certain backgrounds, certain disciplines are seen as more relevant, such as legal studies or policy analysis or anthropology. Like, why do we have that? It's because of how the field was born and how it evolved, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the best way to go. So how do we start to be inclusive and make everybody feel like they're relevant to atrocities prevention, whether an engineer, an architect, or what have you, so that they can respond to whatever approaches are being taken to normalize atrocities, and then implement campaigns to carry them out. So I hear you, and I think the rupture in the field creates opportunity for new models, which is exciting, and we're trying to implement one ourselves.
No, I agree. And I think the thing that's so frustrating to me is that the Trump administration, President Trump signed into law, just staying here domestically in the U.S. for a second, but signed into law in his first administration, the Elie Wiesel Genocide and Atrocities Prevention Act and the Global Fragility Act, both of which Congress had, wide bipartisan support. And the thought process with those two laws was to focus more on prevention and some of the structural changes you're talking about, some of the upstream, prevention. And it's interesting that, within the time span between that administration and now this current administration, you have folks, from within Congress, people like, now Marco Rubio, who's the Secretary of State, completely doing an about face, even President Trump, who signed those, bills into law. And you have certain members of Congress today and on the Republican side that are still trying to support the Global Fragility Act going forward and doing a reauthorization and things like that. But the organ, the bureaus, the departments within the USAID and the State Department that actually implement the Global Fragility Act and that actually implement the atrocity prevention work have all been dismantled. And so it's really interesting, how much can change in such a little bit of time. And, especially I like to think of, the atrocity prevention, movement as this like arc. And, recently, obviously very recently, it's been quite bad. And we'll talk about that in a second. But, we saw some steps going in the right direction with, the strong support for prevention, at least on paper. And then, just doing a complete about face, now Trump, trying to rename the Department of Defense, the Department of War, thinking through about how we need to be more, military first, and which we've been for many years, but just walking back all of that, good, positive momentum towards prevention. I think, and it's not just in the US, you'll see this, in other countries as well, where they're doing military buildups. And, we see this as a trend by and large. And I don't know how, especially when the funding is being cut and, the priorities are being, shifted, how we get back to a place where, what you're talking about is, thinking through the long-term upstream prevention, structural change that's needed to ensure that we're not only avoiding mass atrocities, but we're avoiding the need for, widespread humanitarian assistance. We're avoiding the need for a refugee response. We're avoiding the need for those quick, emergencies, because if you can prevent these things from happening, then you don't need all those other pieces of that work.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's interesting you're saying this, because I do think that it's that upstream structural prevention approach that probably encouraged the Trump administration to shut down all the bureaus and agencies that are focusing on atrocities prevention, because most of it was foreign policy, right? It was looking outwards. But if you're the Trump administration, you're like, well, when are they going to start looking inwards? And what does that mean for our relationship with, Native American communities and our own atrocities and ICE, what ICE is up to? And so I actually think that's the reason, but I'm speculating. I haven't done some rigorous study on it or anything. But yeah, I hear you. But with all of that, I mean, you did mention as well, the rupture even in the genocide studies community is also something that's really occupied my mind. I don't know if you want to kind of set that up, but...
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, for many of us in this community that try to approach this work, and when I say, this community, I don't know what you mean. When I say the atrocity prevention community more broadly, I'm talking about people in academia, people that are working in NGOs and CSOs, people that are on front lines, activists that are doing this work. It's a pretty widespread community. And sometimes people are doing atrocity prevention work under a different name, right? So the peace builders that are out there, the countering violent extremism, there's a lot of different pieces of that puzzle. But for many years now, it seems like a lot of us have been trying to focus on prevention more broadly, but we also see this challenge right now, obviously, with everything that's going on in Gaza and Israel's atrocities, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank and in several other places that they are choosing to bomb. Many people in this community have had a blind spot for Israel for a long time. And I would say that for a few different reasons. One being for funding, because for far too many years, the second that you criticize Israel, you're called an anti-Semite, even if you're Jewish, which is insane. And I think...
Sorry, it's just astonishing and counterproductive on so many levels. Sorry, go ahead.
For sure. No, and then you have, many people that fund this work. Not that I'm saying that they're completely incapable of being objective, but many people that fund this work are, proud Zionists. And so they're defenders of Israel. And so any kind of criticism of Israel and Israeli policy would go on the fit, against the kind of the funders' wishes. But also just, we haven't talked about this issue nearly enough. And many organizations just choose and have chosen in the past not to focus on it. And if you take, everything that's happened over not just the last, couple of years since October 7th, 2023, but, even before that, and you apply the same issues to another country, those same organizations would be speaking about it. But because it, fell within the lines of Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, they didn't. And so right now what we're seeing play out really is a fracturing, as you said, in the atrocity prevention community, where some are trying to be objective and say, look, like, we're following the letter of the law. This is, what we're looking at when we look at the definitions of genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and ethnic cleansing. And we're applying it here. And other people, trying to, I don't know how they're trying to defend what Israel's doing, or they're trying to say that, they're wrong. But again, just by looking at what's happening from an objective lens, it's hard to argue that these things are not happening.
Absolutely. And I think it's all symbolized in kind of the rhetoric and the conflict that's come up around the IAG's resolution that was passed, and also the anti-resolution statement by the Scholars of Truth, I believe they're calling themselves.
This new, so IAG being the International Association of Genocide Scholars, and then this other initiative, Scholars of Truth, that just came out of nowhere, pretty much in response to the IAG resolution.
And for those that don't know, essentially IAG's, the association, passed a resolution, and they met their quorum. They passed a resolution and, publicized that, declaring that from what they have in front of them, the evidence available, they've concluded that Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians. And, there's been backlash and debate around how many people actually voted. So you've seen news media reporting. Of course, they're a lot of times they're romanticizing, exaggerating, trying to catch a headline or catch an eye through their headline. And so they say 500 plus genocide scholars agree that, and so, there's been some pushback that actually it was just, 20% or a little over 20% that voted. And then from there was about 20 that voted against, et cetera. And then the details start to come out. And then those that were anti said that, I guess they expressed that they asked for a town hall and a debate, and that never happened. They were promised that, and that never happened. We don't know, right? We don't know. I'm actually not renewing my membership with IAGS. Done with all that, but have been around enough to hear kind of all of this and watch all this unfold. And when I was sitting there thinking about, okay, if you look at the IAGS resolution, I actually think because we're in the middle of the genocide, it would have been helpful, let's say, to include like a data set where, what's your data set that you're working with? That I think in and of itself, just having Netanyahu's words linked in would be a lot more powerful than some of the news articles that were linked in. But that wasn't something I was helping with, so we shouldn't criticize, right, if I wasn't part of it. And then there's the anti, that, the response, and it's so ideologically and driven, and it's based on positionality, and it's obvious because of the lack of logic, evidence, and also just the interviews. Like, you hear these people representing the pushback, and some of them can't even define genocide. Some are saying intent is the most important part. It's like, no, it's all three components, actually. And depends on the case study. If you look at, let's say, the Baha'is in Iran, the Iranian Islamic Republic of Iran has been perpetrating genocide against the Baha'i community for decades, calling them a political group because they're not one of the protected groups of ethnic, national, racial, or religious. But they are a religious group. And so even though there's the intent to destroy them, they're not a protected group. So even in interpreting the legal definition, there's a lot of problems. And I started to think, I could poke holes here and poke holes there, and we could call this out. And I was like, I'm a purpose-driven person. Like, what is the purpose of that intellectual or legal exercise? And I think it comes down to this. This is what I've come to. It's that if you look at the purpose of genocide studies from what has been articulated from its founders and scholars, last 30 plus years, it's to study, to understand, to compare cases, and to prevent future victims from existing in the first place, right? It's the
Yep.
prevention components in there. But when you look at IAGS as an association, I'm wondering, to what extent has it been an intellectual exercise when we do pass resolutions, right?
Hmm.
13 over 30 years, that's pretty low.
Right.
That's like nothing. It's like, right? So, and then how long does it take us? 2 years after? You have nutritionists on Instagram saying it's genocide 2 years ago, right?
Right.
2 years later, oh, we passed a resolution. There's huge problems with it, apparently. So what is the goal, right? And then I think it's that some folks are interested in the intellectual exercise or the legal debate as an end in
Hmm.
itself, as
Yeah.
an end in itself. They are interested in that. That's the priority. And the pushback or the anti-resolution statements that I've seen, a lot of it is around, we didn't have a town hall, we didn't debate. Meanwhile, people are dying, right?
Yep.
So there's those that really want to debate and discuss these issues as an end in itself. And then there's those that are interested in it for prevention. And those are the people that are thinking, if we have enough evidence to believe that there is a genocide or might be, they could be convinced to act, right? It's like there's like a different set of priorities. And so enough evidence is reason to move. And in retrospect, let's say we, dissect everything that we do have at our disposal and all the evidence, and we realize, oh, one component, we didn't meet the threshold. Oh no, we were wrong.
Yeah.
I don't think those that are interested in prevention are going to worry as much as those that are interested in the intellectual exercise. And I think that's what needs to be, I guess, redefined in these networks is, what is the goal? What are we doing
Right.
together? And, what is the purpose of our existence? And I don't think IAGS knows that. I think they
Yeah.
articulate it here and there, but there isn't consensus. I also think the membership of IAGS is made up of all these different people, like students trying to network and get a job. Like, it's not just folks that might even fit the agendas I've outlined. So in I guess summation, for me, it's, if you're interested in prevention, you don't care about the hierarchy of crimes. You don't care about,
Right.
being right before you move. You see harm, you name it, you move, and
Yep.
then the luxury of retrospective analysis can, be exercised by whoever wants to participate, and we can all debate all the things after lives have been saved and people are safe, right?
Yep.
So that's really the crux of the issue for me. And so for me, it's like, I want to join those that are interested in prevention, and I have some ideas around how things would look and how different they would look if that was the case. But I'll hold there because I'm kind of rambling.
Yeah, well, I would just say, I think, you made a lot of really good points, and I think the biggest thing for me always is prevention, right? And I tell my
Totally.
students this, I write about this, I speak about this regularly, is that, in some ways, the reason why the term mass atrocities came to exist is because we needed to get away from these,
Yes.
nonsensical definitional arguments while, these crimes were happening. And so, for those who don't know, mass atrocities encompasses genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and depending on who you ask, also ethnic cleansing. I say that because ethnic cleansing is a term of art in many ways, not a legal term, and most of the crimes under ethnic cleansing would fall under crimes against humanity. But that's the thing for me. The difference between the IAGS resolution and this counter, statement is, in the IAGS resolution, they include and they say Israel is not only committing genocide but also war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Yes.
Right? The Scholars for Truth, ridiculous statement says nothing about war crimes and crimes against humanity. And so I think from that standpoint, you're being, like you said, there's room to debate because the definition of genocide is so narrow, with the intent to destroy in whole or in part an ethnic, national, racial, or religious group. But it's impossible in many ways to argue that Israel is not committing war crimes or crimes against humanity. And the Scholars for Truth statement specifically cast the blame on Hamas for Israel's crimes. And they say, Hamas is the one that's committing these war crimes because there's civilians there. Meanwhile, the area of Gaza is so small that if you're going to argue, well, there are, Hamas, people, members of Hamas that are around the entire Gaza Strip, that everywhere is a battlefield. I always like to say, on the flip side of that, the IDF has, conscription. So people, if you're an Israeli citizen of a certain age and you're forcibly conscripted into the military, does that make everywhere in Israel fair game for warfare? Because
Right.
and also the headquarters of part of the IDF is in downtown Tel Aviv, and so there's been arguments about that. Like, can you then blow up Tel Aviv because it's within the radius of these headquarters? So I think it's like a little silly for this group, Scholars for Truth, which some of these people are, decent names in the atrocity prevention space. Some of them are only Holocaust, folks, which, I say because it's a little bit, Holocaust studies is a separate thing in and of itself. But, it's really frustrating to me as somebody who identifies as Jewish and an atrocity prevention advocate and everything else to see so many Jews on this list. And it does nothing to help this, vision that some people have that, Jews are connected to Israel and Jews will always defend Israel and all this other stuff. Like, there's plenty of Jews that have spoken out, including academics and others, about this, including former, prime ministers of Israel coming out and saying that Israel is committing war crimes and potentially crimes against humanity. But to see so many, that have positions, and not only, general positions, but positions in universities where they're now, I'm assuming, teaching courses on the definitions of these crimes and how these crimes, emerge. And then in those classes are going to be teaching these students. I don't know what they're teaching them. And that, to me, scares me, not only for this exact moment that we find ourselves in this fracturing. Again, I think if you take everything that Israel has done in the Gaza Strip and you look at it objectively, you take it out of that context of Israel and Palestine and you apply it to any other country in the world, you would easily be able to say, oh, that's 100% war crimes and crimes against humanity. And the fact that these, 100-something people that signed on to this, the statement, I'm scrolling, it's actually over 200, maybe 300 people, many of whom have positions, like I said, at universities. Like, that's a scary prospect to me that, these are folks that are so willing to not just say, no, we disagree with the IAG statement. And that in and of itself, is an argument that you could have, but to say Israel is not committing any war crimes or crimes against humanity is just insane to me.
Well, and it's also telling that it's a bit ideologically and belief driven and even identity driven, because there's no yes and approach, right? Let's say we can provide evidence that Hamas did intend to commit genocide through their attack on October 7th. How does that immediately negate the possibility that the Israeli state is trying to commit genocide against Palestinians? That is mind-boggling to me. I don't understand that.
And war crimes and crimes against humanity. Even if you want to leave genocide out of it,
you don't even need to have but the statement does say Hamas is committing genocide, and it's only like about 4 lines out of the whole thing. You're just kind of going to throw it in there and keep moving. I'm like, okay, let's say we can provide evidence to support that claim. It's clear that this is an ideologically driven position statement if you're not even willing to consider a yes and approach. Right.
And to use, like you said, the words of Israeli politicians and Israeli leaders that have flat out said,
defectors, you name it.
Like, their goal is to resettle Gaza. And so, and, now the West Bank, Netanyahu coming out and saying there will never be a 2-state, solution. They're screaming it from the rooftops, and it's very frustrating to see, some of these people, again, who have seemingly good educations and, seemingly good jobs. But I like to compare it to, the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And I can't imagine a world in which the community, academic field, employers, et cetera, would tolerate people defending Russia and saying, well, Ukraine was really the one that was committing, genocide. And so that's why Russia is doing this. I don't see a world in which that ever happens. And yet, for some reason, you can defend all of these crimes that Israel is perpetrating. And again, I think we need to separate things out, because I always get frustrated about this. I'm an American. I have spoken out against, things that the United States government does for many, many years, right? Dating back to the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, the torture program, extraordinary rendition, drone strikes. Everything that we're seeing right now domestically with the Trump administration. nobody says to me, you're anti-American. Like,
Mhm.
you hate America. I mean, I'm sure there are some people who would say that about me, but that has not happened yet.
Mhm.
However, if you criticize not the Israeli people, not the Jewish people,
Yeah.
not whatever, what the Israeli government is doing as an entity,
Yeah.
people will then still label you as,
And
a Jew hater. You want death to Israel, like, and that's not the case for many people.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why when I think about like what is the purpose of somebody like myself, for example, I'm really just interested in the prevention aspect. Studying genocide for me is the means to that end. And
Right.
so why be a part of these associations like when they don't
Yeah.
know what they are, and or really how to manage the diversity, I think, properly. And it's no knock to the executive committee. I actually love a lot of the people serving. I think they're
Yeah.
phenomenal scholars and human beings, but it's more about as a system, as an entity. It's just kind of gotten carried away and gotten out of hand as to what this thing is. And to have the scholars of truth emerge shows us that we had some cleanup to do in house. Like we have some work to do internally.
Yeah.
And that speaks to kind of, it goes back to how our field as a collective functions anyway. And I think this is, if it's okay, I'd love to pivot here, because if you are interested in the study of genocide for prevention, then we would be public facing. We would be all Mike Brands, right? We would all have TikTok followings. We would all have
Yeah.
a lot of public engagement. If you think, for example, of like the hard sciences, the medical sciences, nutrition, there's so much public engagement that everyone thinks they're a nutritionist now. You know what I mean? Like there's
Hmm.
the PR program is strong. Like
Yeah.
it's there, and it engages the public in discourse that's relevant to the field, which is what we need. But we keep talking to each other. And
Right.
if we branch out, it's to the usual suspects. It's the legislators, it's the donors,
Hmm.
it's the civil society entities. No. I am reminded, if it's okay, I'll share this. Dr. Ashad Sentongo. Do you know Dr. Ashad Sentongo?
No.
A brilliant genocide scholar who passed away actually June of last year. Very dear friend. He used to talk to me all the time about like the problems in our field. We would gab all the time, and he would always say we need to localize atrocities prevention. And I kept,
Yeah.
or not, sorry, he wouldn't say that. He would say politicize. We need to politicize
I mean, both.
Yes, we need to politicize atrocities prevention. And at the beginning, I was like, as you know, the personal is political, everything's political. I'm like, what is he talking about? Of course, atrocities prevention is political, like by sheer
Yeah.
nature of the identity-based conflicts. But what he was actually saying is, in the same way that we have social services, child and family services, welfare, what have you, at the local level, there should be tax dollars at the local level and engagement at the local level across the world on
Hmm.
atrocities prevention service delivery as a part
Yeah.
of our governance systems. And we have kind of bits and pieces here and there in like the Canadian context, for example, a bit around truth and reconciliation between
Sure.
settlers and indigenous nations and communities, etc. But it's all superficial, it's performative. A lot of we're not dealing with the actual issue of disposition of land, and not enough people are involved. Like we don't have the popularization and institutionalization and I guess politicization down pat yet. And
Right.
that's why when I'm thinking about the up and coming generation, I don't say to those students that are asking me for advice on how to get involved, I never say join IAGs. I never say join X, network. I say you go out there. First of all, find other means of generating income and don't rely just on our field. So you always have the power to act in line with your values. And you get rid of that dependency. And I also talk a lot about like, how do you bring atrocities prevention to another passion you have? So if you're
Hmm.
in architecture, weave it into that,
Right.
as opposed to come brand yourself as some superhero with a cape that's going to come in and save the day, which we got to get away from. And the gatekeepers of who gets to call genocide. That's our problem. We don't
Hmm.
democratize that power. So if genocide studies for the pursuit of prevention is the agenda, we have to completely rethink how we even study and share the findings of our studies, and with whom and why and all of those things. But I'd love
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And I think to some degree, what you're saying at the end there about democratizing, who gets to say something is genocide. I think this is a problem in and of itself. And this is why, so often I really try to focus on just mass atrocities more broadly, because A, there are people that misuse the term genocide for political purposes, like
yeah.
knowingly, right? Like anything that's bad, they will try to apply the term genocide to
Yes.
in order to then try to get more attention. And I think, wrongly, many people still believe that when the term genocide is used, it means that something is somehow worse. And that's not
Yes.
necessarily the case. There's many cases where, again, because of the strict definition of genocide in those four protected classes, the war in Syria and the violence against civilians for many, many years by the Syrian government under Bashar al-Assad, like you couldn't argue that that was genocide because of just the populations that were being targeted. But crimes against humanity, war crimes were horrible.
Right.
And the level of destruction, the level of people that were being killed, the level of displacement was at a high. And so I think that's one component of it. And so I would just say, to use your phrase, yes, and like I also don't want so many people being like empowered to use the term genocide, because then everything's a genocide, and that's not useful either. And then on the other side of that, I would say we need to just get away from this idea that unless we call something a genocide, like we can't be doing something about it, And so when, I've done a lot of work on Sudan, and, for many months under the Biden administration, people were trying to push the administration to make an atrocity determination. They finally did, and they left out genocide. They said that, both the RSF and the SAF were committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. And so many people were focused on, well, we need to get them to make a genocide determination. And stuff like that's beyond the point. Like, and also, there's been plenty of evidence to show when we do use the term genocide, it doesn't really change our policy, right? The U.S. government in the last few years has made a genocide determination in China because of the violence against the Uyghurs in Xinjiang province, against the Burmese military and Burmese militia, whatever, for crimes against the Rohingya, and Sudan, right? And so in all of those cases, once that determination was made, it wasn't like a massive policy shift happened, right? And like the situations in all those places are still bad.
Never does.
So I think that's one component of it. And then the other side is just like, why are we focused so heavily on that and not the policies? Like, who cares what we're calling it in the moment?
Right.
Let's just focus on protecting civilians, right? And ensuring that we can end the violence, and eventually, hopefully, hold perpetrators accountable. But that's not what we're doing. And I wrote a piece about this, this idea that right after World War II and the Holocaust, there was a lot of focus, especially by Lemkin, to get genocide to be codified in international law. But if instead of that happening, we had crimes against humanity as the first piece of international human rights law that was passed into law, would we be so focused on genocide as this like crime of crimes and needing to apply that label? Or would we have been better served by having a crimes against humanity convention at the time and focusing on that, because it can apply to many other things. And this way we get out of this kind of definitional arguments that we so often find ourselves in.
I mean, absolutely. And that's maybe the agenda of those that want to push the more preventative, set of goals attached to genocide studies, is to scale up. How do you create the moral outrage, urgency, and response to crimes against humanity?
Right.
How do we do that? How does that happen in practical terms? And I think it's to highlight that in order to prevent, usually you do have systematic, large-scale human rights violations occurring as indicators of where we're headed, right? And so, but also, I want to go back to your reflections on democratizing who gets to name the harm. If you think about, what did Raphael Lemkin do? He named something a crime without a name. That's what he said, right? So he's watching something unfold, he's hearing about it, he's observing it, and I don't understand why we don't afford every single person that experiences atrocities across the world or witnesses them that same legitimacy and freedom to name what they're seeing or living through. No, it has to be professionalized. Well, professionalizing makes it exclusive. And when you make it exclusive, you can't respond quickly. And you can't respond to prevent, because everyone now has to parachute in and call something for us to care. But I hear what you're saying, and I think about it at length. It's that, well, then everybody's going to politicize or instrumentalize the use of genocide. It's okay, but if we ask for the evidence and they're meeting the component parts, even if it's, driven by a personal political agenda, let's go back to the evidence. Let's go back to the evidence and decide for ourselves. And democratizing its use doesn't just mean those that get to label it are diversified, but also we can interrogate anyone that's claiming or the argument of anyone that's claiming a genocide's unfolding. So if an everyday citizen or somebody with a political agenda saying they're here, it's genocide, show us the evidence, show us the component parts are being met. Let's dig in together. But I think your other point's way more important, is that why do we care so much in real time? How do we get the moral shock, outrage, and response toward crimes against humanity, or even just structures that put people at risk should be, in my personal agenda, structures that put people at risk should be morally shocking and alarming? Because if not, then upstream's a joke. Upstream prevention is just not going to work. But with that said, I guess, what do we think needs to happen next? Right? And I would love to hear your thoughts. I have thoughts, but I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things, and I think the last point you made, of like, why do we care so much, and how do we just get them to care about any of these issues? And also the fact, you didn't phrase it this way, but like the fact that before you get to crimes against humanity, even, there's usually gross, violations of human rights. And so those are early warning signs, those indicators that it could amount to crimes against humanity if it becomes widespread or systematic. But I think it's really difficult. One of the challenges that I've, struggled with over these years, I got really involved in this, space during the Darfur genocide in the early 2000s.
Yeah, I remember this.
And I watched in real time as there was several organizations, several, faith-based organizations, several different, groups and people that weren't first and foremost an anti-genocide or an anti-atrocity, person, but were involved in the space, be so involved in that movement. And when we tried to make a pivot from the very, black and white issues in Darfur and the very simple explanations of what was happening and the very clear, this is genocide, to including other atrocities around the world, people got lost.
Right.
And the message wasn't as clear. And people were like, well, how do I pay attention to this and that and this? And unfortunately, the reality is there are more mass atrocity situations happening simultaneously today than there have been in recent years. And not only that, but you have the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council all complicit in several of those atrocities. And so I think, how do we get people to care? I mean, I think part of it is just, it's really difficult to get people to care about so many places at the same time. And there has been some movement about tying together similar struggles, like a lot of posts online are tying Gaza to Sudan, to the DRC. But those are very different contexts. And I think that's part of the challenge, is sometimes people will lump things together for potentially good, a good goal of trying to show solidarity with other people that are suffering. But the response, the actors, the international players, the reasons for the atrocities, all these different things are different in those different contexts. And part of it is that people just, I'll say definitely in America, I don't know about everybody else, but have a short attention span, and they don't want to learn all the ins and outs of a situation. They don't want to understand all the actors. They just want to know who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. And we've, for too long, kind of shot ourselves in the foot by painting things that way, because it's usually much more complicated than that. More often than not, there's international actors that are involved. It's not just domestic actors. And so I think that's part of it, is we need to figure out a way to reach people with simplified information without dumbing it down too much, trying to get people to care about more than one place and show that these things are interconnected
Mm-hmm.
and bring it back home. Like, how do we tie this back to why does it matter to me? Why does it matter to somebody that lives in Canada or lives in the US or lives in the UK or something about something that's happening a world away? Because for so many people, they don't see that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing, and I think about this all the time, when I was younger, getting involved in the space, I was at a conference, on the situation in Darfur, and somebody was speaking about how, we had it easy because there's no pro-genocide lobby. If you're going against the tobacco industry, you're going against big oil, you're going against big pharma. Like, there's millions of dollars poured into those lobbies for those efforts,
Mm-hmm.
and we're fortunate enough that there is no pro-genocide lobby. The fact of the matter is, there is pro-atrocity lobbies, right? Like,
Yeah. The forever
dictatorial
wars.
states,
Yeah.
dictatorial states,
Yeah.
that are here in Washington D.C. and other capitals around the world.
Oh
They
yeah.
spend a lot of money
Big.
on lobbying governments.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in South Sudan, the U.S. government was trying to get some kind of transitional justice mechanism going, and South Sudan was trying to hire lobbyists to the tune of millions of dollars to lobby Washington against that.
Right.
And so, we see this regularly, and it's a bigger challenge. And I think part of the answer to your question, in my opinion, is we need to ask people, like, not just how are we going to get people to care, what would make you care? Like,
Yes.
what? Like, I don't think we've done enough of that. Like, going to the people that we keep trying to say that we want to attract to these issues.
Yes.
And frankly, like, there's just some people that never will.
Yeah. And I think so. So many thoughts to what you said, and I'll start with the first point, which is when we think about get people to care about, let's say, a Darfur sitting in Canada or the United States. I would say yes, and how do we stop thinking of the spaces of intervention as outside of our as beyond our backyards? So why, and I'll tell you why, it's because we're trained to. When I did I won't say the name of the program, one of my degrees, the professors are teaching you that the field is primarily in the global south.
Right.
And it's romanticized and sexy to be able to go on a trip to one of these countries, right? So we have a problem of feeling like we're immune in some societies. It's not happening here. And we have a problem of not caring about, other parts of our human family suffering these atrocities across borders. And so if we were in tuned to how it's unfolding in our own backyards, we might have more empathy for how it's unfolding across borders. And so I think it actually goes hand in hand. Stop teaching students that the field is somewhere else other than their own community, A.
Yeah.
And B, that I think will inculcate the empathy or infuse them with the passion and interest to even pay attention to all these other contexts and know what to do and how to handle it and how to take care of themselves, because that is a skill set to be able to confront those images and feel the feelings of helplessness and keep going back, right? So absolutely, I hear you. And I think both of those things have to happen. And then when it comes to, trying to get people to care and why don't we ask them? I've done this on a very small scale. As you know, I want to start going very public facing, as you've been doing for years. And in just asking my friends and families and members of my network, acquaintances, like that, absolutely, it's not that they don't care, it's that they don't even know how to. It's so overwhelming, and they're so embedded in their everyday and their own survival and providing and all the things that to ask them to pivot, to start to care, they're like, oh, but I thought that there's like professionals like you that do this stuff. You guys do this work. And so they feel removed from it. And almost like they're not, that again goes back to the professionalization and the implications of that for participation. A lot of them feel like they don't have enough knowledge to chime in. Who are they to have an opinion? And that is very scary to me. It almost directly undermines our collective goal as genocide prevention scholars and practitioners. And so, so I think that thinking, and the more, and again, at collaborative structural change, we're trying to bring in people with diverse skill sets from other fields, because we understand that that exclusivity makes people feel irrelevant to the movement.
Mm-hmm.
I also think you and I have talked about this a lot, if I circle back to this, of just like popular content, like entertainment,
Yeah.
right? You've thought of shows you wanted to pitch. I've thought of shows I wanted to pitch, you know.
I think that it's interesting because as you were talking about like the glamorization of going to exotic places, whatever, I
Yes.
was thinking exactly about that part of our conversations.
Yeah.
And I think there's a push and pull there, right?
Mhm.
Like you, on the one hand, don't want to glamorize, this work in some ways that, makes things seem sexy for people, even though like they need to be doing it in their own backyards, like
Yes.
everything like you said.
Yes.
And in some ways, maybe we need some of that, even if it's not 100% accurate, because
Mm.
all the time we've talked about this, constantly, is that you can go on Netflix, you can go on Hulu, you can go on HBO Max, you can go any of these sites,
Mm.
and you'll find an endless stream of content about wars,
Totally.
content about the military,
Yes.
content about, whether that's documentaries or, like fictional kind of things.
Mm.
Similarly, on any given channel, you'll find several programs about ERs and
Yes.
hospitals,
Yes.
several programs about cops,
Yes.
several programs about firefighters.
Yes.
And like we never seem to get sick of
No.
that content, even though like, like NYPD Blue Bloods, Chicago
Yes. Blue
PD, like I mean, they're
Shield,
so similar,
all the
Law and
things.
Order. I
Yeah.
mean, like there's
Yeah.
an endless amount of things. But I think about it too, is like in America, at least, when I talk to my students, I ask them, like what kind of peace building lessons do you get? What kind of conflict resolution lessons do you get?
Mm.
I think really formally we get, when you're a little kid, you're taught to share and
Right.
like not hit other kids.
Right.
And then at some point you learn about like Martin Luther King Jr. and nonviolence.
Yeah.
And like that's kind of it.
Yeah.
There's no in between. There's not a lot of focus on negotiation. There's not a lot of focus. Maybe if you're involved in
Critical
like Model
thinking.
UN.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any.
But
Yeah.
maybe we need like a Netflix show about humanitarian assistance
Yeah.
and a mix of an international actors and local actors and
Mm.
seeing peacekeepers. I mean, I don't know what that is,
Mm.
but to kind of in a way bring it front and center for people that aren't pre-exposed to this work, right? Like if you're in this
Mhm.
space, you are learning about these issues, but if you're not,
Mhm.
it's so far removed from anything that you understand.
Mhm.
And sadly, like I remember very vividly, did you ever watch the show ER?
Yes.
Like back in
I
the
mean,
day?
yeah, a couple episodes. I
Yeah.
get it.
So
Yeah.
like ER, it's like one of the best like hospital like drama shows or whatever.
Yeah.
But there was a time when the show was still on while the Darfur crisis was going on. And they had an episode where they were in Darfur, like the Doctors Without Borders or something like that.
Mm.
And my mom was like texting me, like, oh my God, like ER. And she was watching it and like, she knew about Darfur because some of the work that I was doing. And like I brought her to a couple of rallies and things like that.
Mm.
But because it was on a show,
Right.
so many more people probably heard Darfur for the first time watching ER
Right.
and learned about some of the things that were happening, in the most brutal episodes of violence in Darfur.
Mm.
So I think we do need a little bit of that, even though if it will come with some negative side effects, some kind of understanding of like what it is that humanitarian workers do, what it is that people on a peace building, organization do. What does advocacy look like? Like we don't have that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. And I would apply that logic to pretty much any form of entertainment, video games. I was actually
Yeah.
talking to a colleague of mine, more a friend than a colleague, who's a tech savvy IT guy at Microsoft, and I said, I don't understand why there isn't like a huge surge in, let's say, video games where the person that's playing is navigating a peace negotiation process or an armed conflict, or what does it feel like to be a refugee? Like, what are you actually experiencing? Or
Right.
and I was thinking, like, even if it existed, would people pick it? Right?
Right.
Like, that's the piece. That's why I think you're correct that even if to penetrate those structures and those spaces, we have to understand what's appealing about them.
Right.
And to a degree that doesn't compromise values, of course, underpinning the work, try to meet folks where they're at and why they're picking certain content, and then bring them where we would love them to kind of walk with us to. So yeah, I would apply that logic to video games, to music, to even just like I said, social media content and followers. There's so
Yep,
few that you can follow to teach you about the nitty gritties of
for
our
sure.
work.
Like off the top of your head, like what can you think of a movie, like a feature film that is focused on a peace negotiation? I can think of one, and that's it.
A peace negotiation.
Yeah, like the work that
No.
you were just talking about,
Yeah,
like the nitty gritty. There's a film called Oslo. I'm pretty sure it's called Oslo, about the Oslo Accords,
yes. Oh,
and it's a dramatization, based on testimony and everything, real characters that were there of the negotiations, in the dark kind of the Oslo Accords. But besides that film, which is pretty good, and I recommend people watch it, uh, I don't know of another film that focuses on that.
I don't know of any. I mean, maybe I just don't watch enough movies,
No, but like, you can name, I'm
gives
sure,
me the
plenty of
life.
movies
Yeah, yeah,
about
yeah.
war, right? Like
Yeah.
it's just the content's not there.
It's not. And again, even if it was, I think the fact that you're saying, even if we do exaggerate a bit, or at least give the content the elements that draw people in, why they're even engaging that medium for entertainment, then yeah, it might suck a little bit, or we might not think like, but if you look at ER or The Resident or Grey's Anatomy, all of it's exaggerated. Any doctor you
Yeah, for
ask is
sure.
like, it's garbage, like half the terms are wrong or whatever. But
Right.
it gets us to understand and have empathy for those doing the work. It gets people inspired to do the work.
For sure.
It gets people to become critics of the work and understand the
And you
politics.
hear from people that are in the field. I mean,
Yes,
Noah Wiley,
yes,
with the pit and also his work on ER,
yes,
has said how many times people that work in hospitals have thanked him,
yeah,
for showing that side of the work, for showing that it's hard work and everything. And people that were inspired to go into the medical field
yes,
because of seeing those shows.
yes,
And so I think you're right. Like, just exposing people to these things also will allow for more people to be exposed, as in, can I maybe go down this track for my education? Can I maybe, pursue a career in this?
yeah,
Is there more opportunities out there, a different way to approach these issues?
yeah,
But yeah, it's like exposure therapy. Like if you're not exposed to it, there's no way that you'll be aware of it.
totally. And for those that aren't exposed to it at all, they think that what's happening in Palestine is the first genocide in a very long time.
Yeah.
Like, how many active genocides are ongoing right now? If we just look at
Yeah.
settler colonialism that has been determined genocide by
Yeah.
national inquiries, at least in Canada, um, yeah, it's ongoing and in so many different places. So I'm thinking about, okay, well, how can that also help us to normalize the content and engagement with this content so that people don't turn away? Because right now I'm seeing a lot of people freeze or flee the content that they're coming across, and the live feed of the atrocities against Palestinians. They just don't even know how to engage it, and also think it's this very exceptional thing that's happening, and it's not. It's
Yeah.
that's sadly, you named Sudan. It
Yeah.
really is not. And so one other area, in addition to being public facing and penetrating really any apparatus or structure that is normalizing violence, needs a counter narrative of prevention, really, if we're to
Yeah.
summarize that. But also, we need to normalize the skill sets that practitioners like myself and you and scholars have honed, which is, how do you keep seeing these images and not go crazy? How do you keep coming
Yeah.
back? How do you keep going? Even that part, and that's where I think of Ashad's suggestion of politicizing atrocities at the local level, is that we also have to normalize those skills so that people don't turn away and that do concern themselves and have the ability to, because even if they're morally aware and concerned, there's a very practical logistical component, two
For sure.
components that we can't ignore.
Well, I think you said it before about how, some people get overwhelmed. Like, I mean, there's plenty of people in my life that have said, I don't know how you can pay attention to all these things and not just
Lose it.
like lose it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm not to say that I maybe
You
haven't,
have.
but right. Yeah, exactly. It's terrible. But
Yeah.
I think you're right. And it's something that I've been focusing on more and more, recently. And I'm glad that we're seeing it, especially because of Gaza. But connecting the dots, at least in the United States, between who you're voting for and these things in a foreign policy mindset. Because for many, many years, foreign policy just never penetrated, elections. It just wasn't a focus. It wasn't something that voters cared about. It wasn't something that the media covered. It wasn't something that politicians really talked about. And now we're seeing more of that be a focus, that people are paying attention to what their answers are on questions of Gaza, on questions of, some other places. And I think we need more of that, because that's really how we're going to see a change, is if, a disqualifying answer on one of these issues comes, from a candidate, and people hold them accountable by not voting for them because of that, or voting them out of office because of, votes that they've made, even if they agree with them on other domestic issues or whatever the case may be. But we just haven't seen that kind of level of connection between what people care about and what their voting, record is.
And I do think that has a lot to do with really that lack of awareness of how the locals are connected to the global. And I've talked to a colleague of mine, Tana Yamahata. We were talking about how we want to write an article about how there's kind of like a moral imperative now for international relations scholars to start giving public lectures in their locales, talk to people about how the global apparatuses, like be it economic, political, cultural, how do they actually affect your everyday experience at the local level? And make those connections so that people understand when they are going to lobby local decision makers to pass a bylaw or that they're actually accounting for those international dynamics.
Right.
But without being armed with that information, you can have these kind of small legal reforms, small reforms at that local level, but actually not be addressing the bigger picture. And so to what extent can we actually change local dynamics and promote either atrocities prevention or just generally social justice, right? So I also think that there's almost like a call to those that have this knowledge to start to share it and move away from the commodified. I would say it's not that it's commodified only, but it's almost part of your career trajectory to see how many books you can sell and how many peer-reviewed articles you can have people click on and pay for. And that actually characterizes you as a valuable scholar, if you're able to do that. But what about the so-called public professor, right? Like how do we promote that and celebrate that and award that so that, people that see this as their bread and butter are also motivated to become public facing and give free lectures and educate and be really generous with the knowledge because it is a luxury to think about this every day in this capitalist world where we don't own our time. To be able to think about this, like we got to impart that knowledge and get folks debating and discussing so that they can participate in a different way. I wanted to ask you a question really quick about the...
Yeah, and then we probably should wrap up.
Yeah, we'll wrap up. Do you want to wrap up now?
No, it's good. Ask the question.
There's just so much. Around the entertainment piece, I think humor has come up a lot. To what extent do you use humor? Comedians seem to be way more willing to become proponents or advocates and weave into their, routines or their material some kind of statement, whether it's denouncing or it's satire, whatever it looks like, but to draw attention to atrocities cases and atrocities unfolding. And then they get this like massive pushback of like, how dare you shouldn't make this isn't a joke. And but survivor groups often use humor to heal, to survive. So it's not like, if you ask a member of a survivor group, they aren't necessarily offended. It's more about who gets to joke about it, how you can joke about it, and how it's being used. And I just wanted to see if you had any views around that, because I feel like comedians get the worst of it, but they're trying. And they're actually using their platform. They aren't part of our, our specialist fields. They're just deciding to and taking those risks regardless of the pushback and how it might affect their money making machine. So,
yeah. I mean, I think, in my opinion, there's a difference between comedians that are politically savvy and are making statements and jokes about things for a purpose, and comedians that make jokes about tragedy just to be edgy. And I
Right.
think those are very different things,
Right.
right? Like I would say somebody like a George Carlin, right, back in the
Right.
day,
Yeah. Oh,
was ahead of his
so
time
good.
in connecting
Mm-hmm.
comedy to political statements
Mm-hmm.
and analysis, like real analysis of,
Yes.
the global, like, the infrastructure of capitalism, the
Yes.
challenges that we have with the military industrial complex, our own history here domestically, as we were talking about with slavery and genocide against indigenous peoples. Like,
Mm-mm.
he touched on a lot of issues, censorship and free speech,
Mm-hmm.
in a way that was still funny but smart.
Yes.
And a
And
Jon Stewart is
evidence-based.
similar to that,
Yes.
and evidence
Yes.
based. Yeah,
Yes.
so I think there are people who do that well,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd say we need to draw a line, or I would draw a line between those people
Mm-hmm.
and then people that will make like a cheap Holocaust joke just
Oh,
for the
yes.
sake of,
Yes.
you know what I'm saying? Like there's a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like the more nuanced and evidence-based and analytical, I think the more acceptable.
Yeah.
And also just the relationship with their followers and the audience. That's so important.
Acceptable but also relatable. Like
Yes.
there's
Yes.
I would venture to say you'll see better delivery of concrete, smart political points from certain comics and comedians
Mm-hmm.
than you will from people like us, because they do this for, like, they're
Right.
just sharp with their
Yes.
tongue,
Yes.
and so
Yep.
that kind of thing will go viral.
Yes.
Um, but they're making a really smart point.
Yes.
And I think we need more of that for sure, because there's an attraction for people to that kind of delivery.
So popular. So popular.
Yeah.
And a scholar saying, the hard truths that, let's say, Dave Chappelle is saying, just not landing the same. There's no way.
Yeah.
And it will not be shared as widely. And so there is something there, but I can, of course, save that for another day. I don't want to go too
Yeah, maybe we
deep.
need to talk to some comics and figure out how they make their deliveries
Yeah.
land better, and give those talking points to professors and academics and advocates and
Yes.
folks at think
Yeah.
tanks.
Go be funny. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This has been great,
So
and
good.
I'm sure we'll chat again. There's always too many things to talk about, but really appreciate your time, not just today, but as you were saying, we're all counting the minutes in the day, and so I appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I don't take it lightly to be able to reach your community. So thank you for the invite, and hopefully we'll have more of these. We'll see.
For sure.
Okay,
All right.
cool.